So we have installed Axios. Now we want to use that to get the list of posts from our backend and then display them here on this table. So in VS Code, let's open up app.js. On the top, we should import Axios from Axios. Now, earlier in the course, I told you that the right place to call the server and get some data is in component did-mount lifecycle hook. So here in this component, type CDM, that is short for component did-mount, enter, here it is. Now we call Axios.get to send an HTTP request and get some data. The first argument is the URL. What is this URL? That is the URL of our post's endpoint. So let's copy this and then paste it here. Now this method returns a promise. So let's store that here. What is a promise? A promise is an object that holds the result of an asynchronous operation. An asynchronous operation is an operation that is going to complete in the future. You know that when we send an HTTP request, there is going to be a delay until we get the result. It doesn't happen immediately. There's always going to be a delay, maybe 5 milliseconds, maybe a second, or even longer. So this promise object promises to hold the result of an asynchronous operation. When we create a promise, initially, it's in the pending state. Now, when the operation completes, that state will change to either resolved in case of success or rejected in case of a failure. Let's have a quick look at this promise in the console. So console.log of promise. Save the changes. Back in the browser, here's our promise. You can see at the time we logged it, it was in the pending state. However, when we expand it, we can see its status is changed to resolved. That means this asynchronous operation completed successfully. Now these square brackets you see here represent an internal property. So here promise does not have a property called promise status that we can access using the dot notation. This is an internal property. Similarly, we have another internal property, promise value, and this is the actual object that we get when our asynchronous operation completes. In this case, that is the response that we get from the server. So this response object has a few properties like data. You can see here we have an array of 100 posts. These are the posts that we're getting from JSON placeholder. We also have another property, headers. These are the HTTP headers that the server sends to the client. We also have request, which is the original request. We have status, 200, which indicates success. Now, how can we get this response from our promise? Well, this promise object has a method called then. With this method, we can get the result of an asynchronous operation. But this is the old way of doing things, and I don't want to waste your time showing you poor way of doing things. In modern JavaScript, we have a keyword called await. So we can await this promise and get the actual result. So we store the result here in a constant. That result is actually a response object. Now, whenever you use the await keyword in a function, you should decorate that function with the async keyword. So here we should decorate this function or this method with the async keyword. Now let's log this response on the console like this. Back in the browser, here's the actual response we get. Beautiful. But there is a cleaner way to write this code. Here we don't really need this promise constant. We can simply await the result of the call to axios.get and get the actual response object. So we await this, get the response, store it here, and then we don't need the second line. So we have the response. Now this response has a property called data, which is the array of posts we get from the server. So here we can use object destructuring to get data and rename it to posts. Finally, we call this .set state to update our posts. Done. Save the changes back in the browser. You can see our table is populated with the posts we got from the backend. Beautiful. Next, I'm going to show you how to create a new post.